Last season in Washington, the Commanders won 12 regular season games, 2 playoff games, and advanced to the NFC Championship games. And in the offseason, they absolutely got better. Does that translate directly into an equal amount of wins or even more wins in 2025? I take a look at 7 factors that were instrumental in Washington's success in 2024 and see how it affects their 2025 season right here on Ref the District. Let's go. Greetings and salutations and welcome to Ref the District. I'm the Stoner and we've got some really good content for you talking about 2024 and looking ahead into 2025. Real quick before I do, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, share this video, and by all means leave comments of what you think about these factors in 2024 and how they affect 2025. I've got 7 of them because I'm looking back at the 2024 season and man, what a magical season for the Commanders. The best record, the first time they've been over 10 wins and made it to the NFC Championship game since that great Super Bowl team from the 91 season. And it all really started from the top. Everything changed, right? You get new owners, new coaches, new players all the way around. And it's just going to be interesting to see how 2024 translates into 2025. Now, there are a lot of folks, you might call them critics, you might call them haters. They say that 2024 for the Commanders was fluky. It was lucky on so many levels. And there's probably a little bit of truth to that. Maybe just some truth to that, because every team who wins has to have a little bit of luck, have to have some fluky things to happen for them to get there. But did the Commanders have more than their fair share? That's to be debated, and that's something that I'm going to look at in each of these 7 factors for Washington that affected 2024 and made them so successful and how it translates into 2025. We can look back from 2023 to 2024, and Adam Peters comes in. We all remember that first press conference, right? And somebody asked him what he thought of that current roster. And that pause that he gave was so telling. And he did something about that, right? Adam Peters definitely didn't like what he saw in that roster. And he made a complete overhaul of the roster from 2023 to 2024. They had a league high 61% roster turnover from 23 to 24. That was the most that this franchise has ever turned over, dating all the way back to World War II. And of course, it was number 1 in the entire NFL, 61% roster turnover. That doesn't even include mid-season cuts like Jamin Davis, Manuel Forbes, Fedarian Mathis. And then the coaching staff, of course, had a huge turnover. In fact, Tavita Pritchard, who was the quarterback coach under Ron Rivera, was retained, but that's it. Complete, total turnover from 23 until 24. Now, 24 until 25, we look at the roster. They're basically getting the band back together. 34% roster turnover. 76% of the guys are coming back. That's the 11th highest return in the NFL. Think about the key departures from 24 to 25. You had Olamide Zaccheaus, De'Ami Brown, Dante Fowler on defense, John Allen, Jeremy Chin, and of course, cornerback Ben St. Juste. Those are your key departures from 24 till 25. And your key additions that you bring in, Laramie Tunsil at left tackle, Deebo Samuel. Of course, you have Josh Connerly Jr. in the draft, and wide receiver Jalen Lane in the draft. Defensively, you bring in Javon Kinlaw, Will Harris, Jonathan Jones, and of course, Trey Amos is your second-round draft pick. And then you re-signed key guys, John Bates, Zach Ertz, Bobby Wagner, and then you signed Matt Gay to be the kicker, Marcus Mariota, as your backup quarterback. So there's your roster turnover. They essentially said 2024 was such a good year. Why would I want to change that? So bring most of the guys back, and you brought back 76% of your roster. The coaching staff is crazy. Look at the coaching staff in 2024. There's the list of all the coaches. You add in 2025 and you look at the coaches, one change all the way down at the bottom of the list. Your assistant special teams coach is new from last year until this year. They're bringing the band back together. That stands to reason. Okay, fine. You win 12 games in 2024. You essentially come back with the same roster. You get better in the offseason with those additions that I talked about. You bring back all the same coaches who could have left. Cliff Kingsbury could have left. Joe Witt Jr. was in the running for some head coaching jobs. Tavita Pritchard and David Blau, they were offered promotions and more money, and they decided to stay. Something special brewing here. So if you do all that, it might be obvious that this team is going to win at least 12 games again and maybe more. So let's look at the 7 factors that I think affected the team the most in 2024 and allowed them to be as successful as they were, and how that affects them or could affect them in 2025. Number 7, miles traveled. Now, this particular factor alone is not going to make a huge difference, but when you add it into all the others, it might make a big difference altogether. In 2024, Washington traveled 10,550 miles for their away games. That was the least amount in the entire NFL. Looking ahead to 2025, they're traveling more than double that amount, and they're traveling 21,330 miles. That's the 11th most in the NFL. They only crossed the Mississippi to play an away game twice last year, at Dallas and at Arizona. In 2025, they cross only 3 times, at Dallas, at Kansas City, and at LA. But they also make a trip to Madrid. That trip alone is almost the same amount of miles that they traveled all of last year. And think about this for a second. They went last year 10 consecutive weeks without getting on an airplane to play a football game. 2.5 months without getting on an airplane to play a football game. That's kind of a big deal. That was 6 home games, 3 away games, and a bye week. And the 3 away games, a train to Philly, a drive 30 minutes on a bus up to Baltimore, and a train to New York. 10 consecutive weeks where they did not have to get on a plane. Is that a huge deal? Probably not, but that plays into the advantages that they had from last year and compare it to 2025. Is that lucky? Is that fluky? Or is that fortunate? That's kind of just fortunate. That's the way the schedule is. In 2024, the schedule was set up so they didn't play any divisions that were on the West. They didn't play the AFC West or the NFC West. Will it be a factor? Maybe a small one, but it's not lucky and it's not fluky. Just kind of fortunate with that one. Factor number 6, injuries, or in Washington's case, the lack of injuries. If you look at this particular graphic here, this is from Aaron Schatz. He's breaking down basically the number of games, adjusted games lost in 2024 for each team. And where Washington ranks is the 5th least amount of adjusted games lost in the entire NFL. There are a lot of different ways you can look at it, right? This is the one that I found to be the best. They lost basically 45 games due to injury. They were relatively injury-free. If you just think about the injuries that the team had last year, John Allen missed 9 games, Noah Brown missed 6 games, and Austin Eckler missed 5 games, and no other contributing player missed more than 4 games the entire season. That's very rare. Now, of course, guys played hurt. Guys play hurt all the time. But if you're going to play, then you can't give that excuse of playing hurt. We all know Jayden Daniels had a 3 or 4 game stretch where he was playing hurt after that hit he took against Carolina. Overall, you compare that to all the other teams, and Washington was essentially injury-free. How does that translate to 2025? You really can't predict that. Injuries are fluky. You have no idea how to predict it. It's lucky. It's fluky. It's fortunate. It's all of those things. However, in 2025, they could be the least injured team. You just never know. You have no way to predict that. So yeah, I think that was a little bit lucky, a little bit fluky. So that's not something that you can predict, but it was definitely a huge factor for Washington to be successful in 2024. The number 5 biggest factor for Washington's success last season was their 4th down conversion success. And it was wildly successful. They went for it 23 times in the regular season and were successful 20 times. That's an 87% clip. That's top 5 in the last 25 years for any team. Obviously was the best percentage by far last season. If you think about what Jayden Daniels did in those 4th down plays, he had his hand in 17 of the plays, 8 passing, 9 rushing. In his passing, he was 8 for 8 passing on 4th down. He had a 146.7 QB rating on 4th down. 7 of those went for first downs. 7 of the 8. Although he completed all 8, 7 went for first downs. Can you remember the one that was not converted? I think we can all remember that one against Pittsburgh. The completion to Zach Ertz, bad spot. Replay confirms the bad spot, game over. So they did not convert that one. Rushing the ball. He rushed the ball on 4th down 9 times for 85 yards and 2 touchdowns. 8 of those were successful conversions of 4th down. Do you remember the one that was not successful? That was in the first Philadelphia game, and it was 4th and 1, maybe 4th and 2. First drive of the 3rd quarter, I believe. Washington is up 12-10 in a sluggish first half. And he bobbled the snap, messed up the timing. He got knocked out of bounds for a 2-yard loss. That was his only running play that he was unsuccessful on 4th down. So of the 23 attempts that Washington had on 4th down, he had his hand in 17 of them and had 15 conversions. He was 15 out of 17 on 4th down conversions. That's an amazing conversion rate. And by the way, the 3rd one that was unsuccessful was in the 2nd Philadelphia game, which was a handoff to B-Rob on a 4th and 1 that was unsuccessful. And every other attempt that they made on 4th down, they converted 20 out of 23. Now, is that lucky? Is that fluky? Is that fortunate? It's none of those. That's just pure skill. One of the things that we talked about on Ref the District at the beginning of the season is that it's going to be difficult for teams to stop Jayden Daniels on short yardage situations, right? He's a cheat code. Is he running the ball? Is he going left? Is he going right? Is he going to throw it? RPO, read option. He is an absolute cheat code. How does that translate into 2025? Well, I think you're going to see Washington attempt more, but to expect them to keep up an 87% conversion rate, that might be a little optimistic. So I think it might come down a little bit, but there's just no stopping Jayden Daniels. So that's all skill. That's not luck. That's not fluky. That's not fortunate. That's just pure skill by Jayden Daniels. The number 4 biggest factor that helped Washington last year are all those last second wins. They definitely had their fair share of last second wins. They were pretty awesome in late game scenarios last year. But let's look at those in particular, because the critics want to say that they got lucky, that all of those wins were fluky. And I'm going to push back on that, and here's why. The first game that they won at the last second was game number 2 against the Giants. If you remember, Malik Neighbors dropped a pass on 4th down at Washington's 22-yard line with just over 2 minutes to go. He doesn't drop that pass. They probably go in to at least run out the clock and possibly score. If you remember, they didn't have their kicker. They lost their kicker earlier in the game trying to chase down, I believe, Austin Eckler on a kick return. But he dropped the pass. That part is lucky. That happens in games, though, right? The difference is Washington still had to take the ball with 2 minutes and 4 seconds left, drive the ball all the way down the field, 65 yards to get in position for Austin Seibert to kick the game-winning field goal, his 7th field goal of the game. That's where I say you can't count that out to flukiness. That's not fluky. You still have to execute offensively. You still have to go down the field with just over 2 minutes and put your team in a position to win. Jayden Daniels did that. Not fluky at all. Not lucky. Not fortunate. That's just talent of Jayden Daniels and this offense. Then you have the Hail Mary. Was that lucky, fluky, fortunate? Absolutely. 100%. Just the nature of the term Hail Mary is you're praying for a miracle. Now, Washington pretty much outplayed Chicago most of that game, but Chicago turned it on when they had to right at the end of the game. That happens a lot. That would have been a bad loss for Washington. Instead, they got a miracle win. So you can absolutely chalk that one up to luck, fortune, flukiness. That's one. Fast forward to the last 4 games of the season where they won every single game on essentially the last play of the game. And we have to break them each down real quick. You have New Orleans, the Saints. Now, again, you're playing against the second and third string quarterback. Actually, reverse order. They played the third stringer in the first half, the second stringer in the second half. They did enough to put them in position to win, but New Orleans went down the field and scored right at the end of the game and decided to go for 2. Then they had their second string quarterback throw a bad pass, probably even a good pass that doesn't get completed, but Washington survives. That one was a little bit lucky. That one was a little bit lucky for sure. Then you go to the Philly game, the second game against the Eagles. And again, the critics/haters want to say, well, if Devontae Smith doesn't drop that pass, then Philadelphia goes on to probably run out the clock and kick a field goal at the end to win the game. But he didn't. He dropped it. That's a little bit lucky. That part is. He dropped it on 4th down. They end up kicking a field goal to take the lead and giving the Washington Commanders the ball back with time left. This is where it's not lucky. This is where it's not fluky. They still had to go all the way down the field and score the game-winning touchdown with, 6 seconds left in the game on that pass to Jamison Crowder? That's not luck. That's not flukiness. They still had to execute. And that's why I don't chalk a win like that. I don't chalk it up to flukiness or luckiness. Then you go to the Atlanta game. This was where the whole season was on the line. The playoffs were on the line. You win this game, you're in the playoffs. You're playing against a quarterback making his second career start. Was it lucky that Raheem Morris doesn't know how to manage a clock at the end of the game? That was a little bit lucky. Were they lucky that the Falcons had a candy leg kicker who couldn't kick a 56-yarder, was right on line, but it was short? Yeah, it's a little bit lucky. Here's where it's not luck. You go to overtime, and Jayden Daniels takes the ball right down the field. Essentially, he did it all by himself on that drive, throwing and running. And you don't give Atlanta a chance to touch the ball, and you score the game-winning touchdown, the playoff entering touchdown. That's not luck. That's not fluky. That's talent. That's skill of Jayden Daniels. So I don't chalk that one up either. And then the last one is against the Cowboys in the final game of the year when Marcus Mariota drove the team down when they were losing, scored the game-winning touchdown in the last play of the game. So if you want to take all of those fourth quarter stats and those last-second wins and say that's fluky or lucky, I'm pushing back. The Bears, absolutely. That was a lucky, fluky win. The other ones, not so much. They had to make plays to win those games, and they executed when they had to. That's not fluke. That's not luck. The number 3 factor from last year to this year, strength of schedule. And that's the one that gets talked about the most. Rightly so. Their strength of schedule was the second easiest in all of 2024. Only the Dolphins had an easier schedule. So there's no doubt that strength of schedule played a role into the success for Washington in 2024. They played only 5 games against playoff teams last year. You had Tampa Bay, you had Philly twice, you had Baltimore, and you had Pittsburgh. And that's it. All season, only 5 playoff teams. Now, that's just a product of the schedule. You can only play who you're going to play, but that means that they had an easier schedule, relatively speaking. No games are completely easy in the NFL. They definitely had it a whole lot easier. In 2025, their schedule is the 8th toughest going into it. And when you want to say Washington had a 4th place schedule last year to make it really easy for them, that's a little bit of a fallacy. Look at 2025. Look who's at the top of the list. The New York Giants have the most difficult schedule in the NFL going into the season. That's a 4th place schedule that they're playing. So to throw it out there and say, well, Washington had a 4th place schedule. They did, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be an easy schedule. For Washington, it was definitely easier. And of course, the divisions that they played last season. In 2024, they played the AFC North, who had 2 playoff teams, Baltimore and Pittsburgh. And they played the NFC South, who had just Tampa Bay getting into the playoffs. This year, they're going to play 8 playoff teams from the season to go. The divisions that they're playing are the only 2 divisions in all of football that had 3 teams go to the playoffs. They play the AFC West, which is Kansas City, Denver, and the LA Chargers. And they played the NFC North, which is Detroit, Minnesota, Green Bay, all went to the playoffs. That's 6 games against playoff teams. And then you have, of course, the Eagles, which you play them twice. So absolutely, the schedule, this is probably the biggest factor in whether or not Washington can duplicate their success from last year in terms of wins. They've got a much more difficult schedule this year, the 8th most difficult compared to last year, which was the 2nd easiest. That's where you're going to get into your biggest factor of whether or not Washington can repeat the number of wins in 2025. The number 2 factor, which is really piggybacking off of number 3, the strength of schedule, are the quarterbacks that they faced from last year compared to 2025. It stands to reason that if you are playing a tougher schedule, that probably means you're playing tougher quarterbacks. Last year, they did not face a whole lot of tough quarterbacks. Some of that's because of injury. And so that, again, is something that you can't predict. But if you look at who they faced in 2024, who I would put in either the top tier or the elite tier, okay? I'm breaking it down into top and elite versus bottom/unproven. And in 2024, they faced the only quarterbacks that they faced that were top tier or elite: Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Jalen Hurts, Baker Mayfield, and Kyler Murray. I only have Jalen Hurts up there once because he barely played in that second game. He only played basically the first quarter, not even the whole thing. Or maybe it was early in the second quarter when he got hurt. Can't quite remember exactly. That's 5 games against elite quarterbacks, or just top. Because would I say Kyler Murray's elite? No. Baker Mayfield elite? No, but they're top quarterbacks, so I'm going to put them in that list. That's 12 games against Skells or unproven guys. Daniel Jones twice, Cooper Rush, Trey Lance, Andy Dalton, Deshaun Watson, Michael Penix, unproven, Jake Haener, Spencer Rattler, Will Levis, Caleb Williams, unproven, Kenny Pickett, and Russell Wilson. That's just not a murderer's row of quarterbacks. The chance that you're going to do well against a team that doesn't have a great quarterback is proven out right there. Against those better quarterbacks, Washington, of course, lost to Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, and Baker Mayfield, but they beat Joe Burrow and Kyler Murray. And let's not forget, they lost to Cooper Rush last year. They lost to Russell Wilson. And almost lost to some of those other guys. So definitely the QBs faced last year were a whole lot easier than this year. In 2025, barring injury, of course, look at the top tier and elite quarterbacks that they're going to face this year compared to last year. Jalen Hurts twice, Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, Bo Nix, Dak Prescott twice, Jordan Love, Jared Goff, Tua Tagovailoa. That's a lot of games against much better quarterbacks. The only ones that are at the bottom / unproven are Russell Wilson twice with the Giants, Geno Smith, and I consider putting Geno in that top area, but I think he's probably just past his prime now. Sam Darnold, who, if you get the first half of Sam Darnold from last season, then he's top tier. If you get the second half, then you understand why he was not re-signed by the Vikings. Then you got Michael Penix and Caleb Williams and J.J. McCarthy, all second-year quarterbacks who at this point are basically unproven but have a lot of promise. That's a whole lot different in 2025 than it was in 2024. So that's a huge factor. Is that lucky or fluky or fortunate? I think it's a little bit lucky because some of the quarterbacks that they faced were due to injury. They didn't have to face Dak Prescott twice. They didn't have to face David Carr. Now, these aren't great quarterbacks by any means, but they're certainly better than who they had to face, which is their second stringers and their third stringers. They didn't have to face Kirk Cousins. So I don't necessarily think that that's fluky, but it's definitely a little bit on the lucky side. And the number one factor that led to the success of 2024, and we'll look at how it translates to 2025, is the X factor, the A factor, the B, all the way to Z factor, Jayden Daniels. Jayden Daniels had an historic season last year as a rookie. And if you want to be a critic or you want to be a hater and say, well, the defenses are going to be ready for him this year, or the soft schedule, or all those other things that you want to try and put in front of him and say that it was a fluky year, that he's going to have a sophomore slump, I just don't see it. And here's why. The stats, the regular stats, the advanced stats, the metrics, the analytics all point to none of that was a fluke because he was good in all situations, in the pocket, outside of the pocket, going left, going right, knowing when to run, when not to run, throwing over the middle, throwing deep left, throwing deep right, limiting his turnovers, doing all this with a no-huddle offense for most of the season. There isn't any weakness right now because let's look at some of the better statistics that he had last year. He set an NFL rookie record for most rushing yards, highest points per game at 28.5 points per game, and highest completion percentage, 69%. He did all of that as a rookie. He also had a rookie record 12 touchdown passes in the fourth quarter or overtime during the season. So he was doing it when it needed to be done the most, late in games. 5 of those that we already talked about were within the final 30 seconds of overtime or regulation, the most by any player, not any rookie, any player since the merger in 1970. He had the highest passer rating and finished with the most passing and rushing yards by a rookie quarterback in NFL playoff history. So when you get against the better teams, he still kept doing it. We talked about the fourth down conversions, of course, how well he did that. The 146.4 rating when throwing the ball on fourth down is a ridiculous number in itself. And you look at advanced stats. When trailing in the last 5 minutes, Jayden Daniels ranks as the number one clutch quarterback out of 70 quarterbacks who qualify over the last 5 years. Number one overall. He had a plus 0.54 EPA per attempt. That's number one in the last 5 years. He had an 8.9 yards per attempt. So he's not just dinking and dunking. 8.9 yards per attempt in the last 5 minutes of games. That's number one over the last 5 years. 75% completion percentage. That's also number one. And he had a 57% success rate. That was number 3 of 70 quarterbacks over the last 5 years. Couple other stats. He had 3 games last year where the team had 0 turnovers and 0 punts. He had 3 of them last season where Tress Way didn't even get off the bench, except for extra point holds, of course. Maybe the 4 greatest quarterbacks in history: Joe Montana, Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, Patrick Mahomes. have combined for 2 their entire careers. And that's almost 1,000 games. Combined 2. Jayden Daniels did it 3 times just last year. I could go on and on with all of the stats that show that Jayden Daniels is the real deal. Can he continue to do that in 2025? You've got basically the same players. You've improved offensively on the offensive line and your weapons by bringing in Deebo Samuel. You've got the same offensive coaches, the same system, all of that coming back in 2025. Does that translate into 12 wins or more again this year and an NFC Championship game appearance at least? Time will tell. I don't think so. To be perfectly honest, I think they're a better team. I think they're an extremely well-coached team, and they've got who I think is going to be the best player in football in 2025 in Jayden Daniels. But that schedule's no joke. The best teams lose games. It's hard to win in the NFL. So while I think they'll still win double-digit games, I think they'll win 10 games, I don't think they're going to get to 12. And therefore, that's my theory. That's my breakdown of how Washington can be a better football team in 2025 than they were in 2024, and yet still not win as many games as they did the previous year. Now's the time to head to the comment section and let me know what you think about all of this information that I just gave you. Make sure you hit the like button, you hit the subscribe button, share this video, and by all means, get those comments in to see if I've lost my mind or if I'm right on with all this information. Thanks for checking in to Ref the District, and until next time, be a fan.